Lord, keep us humble, keep us real, and keep us always speaking to your glory. In your name, Jesus, we pray.
Amen.
Amen. What's going on, everybody? It's the Bourbon. We're trying out new microphones today. They're a little tap tap. They're a little... They're little table mics. But if we like the sound quality, we're going to switch to them so we can actually use both hands. And we don't have to keep leaning into the microphone. And do you hear me here? Or how about over here?
And hey, guess what? We don't own them, so we're going to take them.
And of course, this episode is brought to you by none other than Investment Whiskey. Can we just give them a hand? Can we do that? Because guess what? We don't have to hold microphones. So we can have two hands.
Well,
Investment Whiskey.
Dan's still new to that.
Well, yeah,
Poor
Dan's
guy.
still
Well done, cripple.
still can't really do it yet.
I can clap now. Oh, good job, Timmy. Oh, boy. I'm a real boy.
So we have
Joseph?
Adam.
Yeah. Give me the lighter, boy. And Dan. I'm here. Unfortunately for you guys at home.
Oh, whoa.
Great. They brought the bald
Burnt the
one.
crap out of my hand.
Nice.
It's okay.
This is fantastic.
Because at least when I feel pain, I feel something.
So we're drinking a little Henry McKenna 10-year. I'm going to ignore that one. And we're smoking the Pravada Not Tony. We just got back from the Hungry Herf in Hubbard, Ohio. Shout out to Cigarro Cigar Lounge.
Amazing place.
The best cigar lounge we have ever been to.
Or heard of. Or seen.
It was just literally 2 days of pure bliss.
Yeah.
2 days of asses in leather chairs.
What?
Nope, I'm going to try that again. 2 days.
So
There
he
it is.
found it. So he used the term "in," not "and," to make
Yes.
sure that you folks at home understand. It wasn't asses and leather chairs. It was asses in leather chairs.
Yeah.
Get your mind out
It was a
of the gutter.
crude remark. We apologize.
It was fantastic, but save that for another time.
But anyway, the vlog, the recap, which is very funny, just released Monday. So please go watch that.
Enjoy.
It's very fun.
Or not.
It's our whole trip. Yes, we were.
No, he said enjoy, and I said or don't,
Oh.
or not.
Or not. Today we're talking about the single life. And I have no room to stand on.
Well, yeah, two of us are married. But I think...
So, Baldy, what do you think?
yeah. So what's it like for you, loser?
Hey, dumbass! What's it like not to have somebody?
So do you go to sleep sad every night?
My tears keep me warm.
Wow! That's just...
My God!
That's just...
Talk about asses and leather
Get a little
chairs.
pop to that one. A little
Golly.
little lift off.
Jeez. Pretty sure you just
What
cut
if I
weight.
just sat higher? Because there's clearly something there.
Yeah.
Pretty sure you
The
just cut
throttles,
weight.
Houston.
Hit the throttles, Houston.
That was a frustration fart. Yeah,
No, that was the fire in the hole.
My week's been terrible.
Have you ever seen those tuner cars and the backfire out of their exhaust? You just had that.
Yeah.
Probably split a board.
No, but I think being married,
Are you
it
taking
gives you a
promo shots during the episode?
Yep. Joseph's talking.
Focusing.
I disappeared, Dan. I think it gives you a little bit of perspective
nice
being
shirt.
married, and you're no longer in that single state anymore. You're no longer discerning. You're no longer looking. You know, now it's the mission of living out this vocation well. And so, I don't know. I think it's like looking back, there are things I wish I had done with more intentionality, not wasted as much of my single years, because the growth that takes place there, it's so much slower once you're married. You know, there's a new new set of skills that you have to start developing once you get married. And so, like, I mean, even just different routines, like, being able to go to the gym whenever you want to, takes a back seat once you get married, especially once you start having kids. Or at least I think it should, because there are other priorities that demand a little bit more of your time. I might go to the gym once a week at this point. My saving grace is I can do push-ups while I'm at work, so that's like the only way I can kind of stay in somewhat shape. Plus,
how can I help you, sir?
That's right. Yeah, I'm just leaning on the counter. Yeah, okay. So what are we talking about here?
Let's try the blue paint.
Right. But and then like the movies that you watch, like I think when you're young and single, there are certain movies that you can kind of get away with watching that then when you get older, you're not going to watch it with your wife. You're probably not going to watch it with your kids because they're young and dumb movies.
Yeah.
Where there's elements in it that, you shouldn't really watch it as a single person. But the point I'm getting to is, like, things that you absorb, things that you do, start to shape you. Gosh, even the movies that you watch when you're single should be something to consider. Like, is this actually shaping me to be a better person for the future, or is this just me being young, dumb, and single that I can get away with it, but it has an impact to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, those are just some of my thoughts on it.
It all makes sense to me.
Oh, well, good. You're doing great.
But
so anyway, this episode was.
That's right. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Next week we'll be talking about.
But like the spiritual life too. The time that you make for prayer, the habits that you form when you're single, the people that you date when you're single, all those things are things that you carry with you to some degree later on.
Absolutely. Well,
go.
Like what we've kind of talked about before, everything has an impression on you. Everything leaves an impression on you.
Right.
To the music you listen to the people you date, to, just all the way to the food that you consume and everything. Mm-hmm. Everything leaves an impression on you.
Right.
And everything, I heard it said everything has a consequence, whether it be positive.
Right.
Well, everything has a positive and a negative consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to you to decide whether or not the positive consequence actually warrants the fruit you get.
Yeah.
Or from doing it, meaning, I think when you're single, you need to. I had about 10,000 things run through my head. I ain't getting there. Good luck. Basically, the idea that I'm trying to present is when you're single, like I am, I think you need to really pay attention to the things you intake, the things you spend time with, because everything has a consequence.
Right.
A positive and a negative.
Yeah, and the things that you spend time with may be things that you have to let go of later on. So, depending on how gripping they are, is something to consider too.
Well, and that's where you need to weigh out how important is this.
Yeah.
Am I actually willing to let this go?
Right.
Because I do 100% agree. When you have a family, or honestly, whenever you start any vocation, I think that's like when you actually make the leap and you fully enter into whatever vocation God has for you, that's when you truly start to offer yourself up for others.
Right.
Like when you're married, you have to be even a remotely decent father, husband, you have to be able to offer up yourself for the betterment for your children and your wife, which means you have to let go of a lot of things that you used to do when you're single, because you don't have the freedom anymore to do that, quote unquote freedom. Mm-hmm. But instead what you're doing is you're offering that up so that way you can spend time with your kids, you can spend time with your wife, you can actually put your wife above you, which is ultimately honestly, that regardless of vocation that you're calling in life, especially as a man, is to put others above you, because ultimately God puts you at a certain position, and to some people they're going to feel like you're above them. Mm-hmm. But if and whenever God gives you that opportunity, and He invests that time and that effort into making you into a leader, your job and your responsibility found it ultimately becomes the people that are quote unquote underneath you serve. That's why you're given that position. Right. As a father, as a husband, as a priest, as a person in monastic life, like regardless of, or if you're just a consecrated single, like your responsibility becomes the people that God puts in your life.
Yeah.
Regardless of what hey, listen.
I'm burning the flies. Regardless of what?
Burn you. Yeah, so I think ultimately, Joseph, kind of going back what you said earlier, I mean, your job is to help / allow God to formate you,
right,
however He needs,
right,
so that way you can truly, once you enter into that vocation, you can just truly enter in. There's not any friction,
right,
that God still needs to kind of rub off.
Right. I think the goal is to mitigate it as much as possible. There's always, we're man, we're fallen. There's going to be some element of death that takes place, things that you enjoyed when you were single that, you're going to have to put to the fire, to some degree. But, I think the more lazy you are, the more selfish you are, the more self-centered you are, the harder it is to let those things go.
Right.
And I think, I'm sure there's a list that we could come up with, but I think two mindsets, if you will, that would help a lot when you're single is, one, recognize that this time is limited. So, in a sense, enjoy it while you can, and that's fine. Do it in a good, wholesome way. When my wife and I were renting an apartment, we often said, this is so great. Let's enjoy this while this lasts. We don't have a house to take care of. We don't have a lawn. We don't have any kids yet. And, this, like, me coming home from work and immediately having a cocktail and sitting down on the couch and Jordan and I being able to talk, and then we go have a nice dinner, and then we turn on a movie, just being able to do whatever we wanted. It was awesome. But we knew in our mind, in the back of our mind, this is temporary. Get ready to let this go. It's not that you're not going to have moments of this later on, but to the degree that we were enjoying it, that's never going to come back, ever. Once you have a kid, your life is radically different.
Right.
Because then when your kids start having kids, now you're a grandparent, and so you're babysitting, and so it's just, and that's how it should be. That's the joy of life and passing it on. But with every joy comes its element of hardship. That's just that's just the state of being human. So recognizing that it's temporary, and then forming good habits that will actually propel you later on. So if all you do is foster bad habits, excessive drinking, binge watching movies, staying up super late, sabotaging the next day, just being lazy in life, that's going to be a rude awakening when you suddenly get married. One, it'll make you less desirable to a woman. So if you truly desire to be married, you're making that job a lot harder, or that success a lot harder to achieve. But then when you do get married, it's going to be a lot of change.
Right.
You're already getting married. That's a big change in and of itself.
Right.
And then you got to undo all these years of bad habits and lack of growth. I'll just say it now. Like, work on it now while you can, because it is far easier to work on yourself when it's just you than it is to work on yourself when there's someone else involved.
Right.
Because now you've got their critiques and the things that they notice. The insecurity level, I think, is a lot higher once you're married if you're not already secure in yourself.
Absolutely. And that's actually something I was going to piggyback off of what you just said. It's a lot easier to accept change when you're the one that recognizes recognizes the change.
Yeah.
Compared to then when you get married and you have your wife asking you to change, you have her side of the family, so the in-laws telling you, hey, this might not be the best thing to be doing,
Right.
because now you're married. Or let's say you end up not getting married, but you end up having a kid with a woman, and you end up marrying her for the sake of the kid. That's a massive change right there, because now you've got you've got 2 of the 7 biggest changes in life happening right then and there.
Right.
And so now you're going to have not only a kid demanding you change, otherwise you'll be a very neglectful parent.
Right, and there are going to be lots of consequences down the road.
And then on top of that, you also now have a wife or the woman who bared your children asking you to change.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the mentality that I have since I am single. Is just, there's one, enjoy the freedom, but also 2, enjoy the fact that it's primarily just me telling me to change. It's
Right.
It's God, but
It's more personal.
It's kind of, it's on me. It's not, I don't have someone else demanding me to change. I don't have responsibilities demanding me to change.
Right.
So instead, I can kind of, not necessarily put my own timeline, but I can kind of be patient in my changing.
Right.
To whereas I don't have responsibilities calling me to change right now.
Yeah. Your accountability partner is not quite so obvious. It's really you, God, probably your parents. It's a smaller group, if you will. Sometimes I'll make a mistake, and maybe I'm trying to solve something, and and sometimes you just need time to just really be able to think it through. And then when I finally come to the right conclusion, I'm like, wow, thank goodness nobody was around to see this stupid brain fart that I just had. And that's kind of your single. Those are, I think that kind of represents your single years. Like it is a time to kind of make mistakes, grow from it, wrestle with it, without the pressure of having someone else needing you to be more on top of it. So it's a grace period, but it's a period that is often wasted, unfortunately.
Right.
Is that on? Can you check it?
Which?
The audio.
Oh.
It was on when I checked.
It was on? Red lights on?
Yep.
All right, cool. Just making sure.
But that's where, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
And that's where you waste it if you don't recognize the opportunity that you have before you when you're single.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, honestly, when they're single are like, oh, God, I can't wait to get, especially men, can't wait to find a woman, can't wait to, get married, or shoot, even just, I can't wait to find a girlfriend. To where it's like, look at all the things that you have to let go when you do receive that. Now, granted, look at the thing that you receive, obviously, and I'm not calling a woman a thing, so shut up at home. But look at the blessing you receive when you do receive it, but look at also all the blessings that you are letting go when you do receive it. And this is where, again, every action has a positive and a negative consequence. And I think part of the maturing process of being single, it becomes a lot easier when you start to recognize and you're able to anticipate what the consequences are before you take action.
Yeah.
And so that's where, before you jump into a relationship, and this is where I'm personally at, honestly, is I don't believe I'm necessarily ready for a relationship. Just all the things happening in my life, all the different responsibilities that I currently have. I don't know if adding a relationship on top of all that would necessarily be beneficial for her.
Yeah.
As well as me. And that's where...
Maybe. Or the right one's going to come along and you're going to realize some of these other things that you thought were important maybe don't matter as much as you thought. You know,
Well,
has a
I'm-
way of realigning you too. But
knowing
I get your
knowing
point.
myself,
Yeah.
it'll probably be more like, oh shit, who the hell's that? And then all of a sudden I'll forget about the other things that I wanted, and I'll be like, I want her.
Life has a way of looking really mucky and moving very slow, and then all of a sudden,
God slaps you,
All
and
of
then
a
all of a
sudden
sudden you're
just-
like, oh my God, this is so quick.
all of a sudden the door opens, things start aligning, and I mean, I went from being single to meeting my wife to being engaged to getting married to having our first kid and then having a house in less than 2 years.
Which is
In
3 of the
fact-
7 massive changes
Right.
that just happened.
Right. Oh, and a new job actually on top of that. So that's and actually 4 of those were within 1 year. We got pregnant, got a new job.
She got pregnant.
Yeah.
You didn't.
True, I did not.
Just making
But
sure.
I played a part. I can
Listen, it's
guarantee it.
2025 and people say otherwise.
I know, it's confusing, but just
Guys, you can't
the
get pregnant.
traditional understanding has always been.
Sit down and shut up.
But within a year, new job, child on the way, new house, renovating that house, like just boom, boom, boom. I mean, it was a whirlwind. It was very exciting. It was a terrific year, but you know, you go from like, when is this going to take off, and then it takes off. It's like being on a plane. You know, you're sitting at the gate, and then you taxi out, and all of a sudden, and then you just take off, and it's an amazing thing.
It was like sitting on the runway waiting for takeoff because there's another plane landing
Yeah.
and they're in your way and you're just sitting there kind of,
Right.
I hope I'm not late getting back. And all of a sudden the plane's like, here we go.
Here we go. But I think life can feel like that. Like, oh, when is stuff going to start making sense? When is it going to take off? When am I going to start seeing success? And
When am I going to start seeing the fruits of my labor?
right. I mean, it's every farmer I think has that anxiety of, I planted the seed. When am I going to start seeing it sprout?
When's it going to rain?
And it will.
Yeah.
It will. It's in God's timing. But you have to have an active role in it.
Right.
You know, you're not going to find your future spouse by sitting on the couch praying for it. You have to pray for it, but then also you have to put
Take
in the
action.
effort and take action.
Right.
We're not. Passive prayer is not a thing. We have to take an active participation in that, in God's will, because you'll miss the boat. You know, it's that funny joke of the guy that ends up drowning. I'm going to shorten it, but the guy drowns at sea, and he asks God, I kept praying for a boat. Why didn't you send? He's like, what are you talking about? I sent 3 ships. Like the first one was a canoe, the second one was whatever. And he's like, oh, God's going to save me. He's like, I sent you 3 boats. Why didn't you jump on one of them? So, like, there's an active participation,
Yeah.
that has to take place. And again, the habits that you form when you're single, they might be habits you have to let go of. I mean, my Friday nights coming home from work before I was married, lighting up a cigar and turning on a movie, that rarely happens anymore. Do I miss it? Yes. I look back and I'm like, oh, those were some good times. I watched some great movies, had some wonderful evenings. But there's something else now
That's
to give
taking
my
its
time
place.
to. Yeah, and you're like, I'm raising a child. I'm married to an amazing woman. I get to spend time with her.
Yeah.
These other things that bring me joy, they're still there, but they're just
Happen
off to the
less
side
frequent.
a little bit. Yeah, like they're there when the time is appropriate. Like this. I love having a cigar with you guys. I couldn't do this every day,
Don't lie to me.
but I'm not. But it's there when the time is, when the time is right.
Mm-hmm.
And I look forward to that. Any thoughts, Adam?
A lot.
Too many.
I think there's productive selfishness and selfish selfishness. I think you could spend, which this is kind of my story, but you can spend your single years pursuing moments. You can spend your single, like, when you're single, it's a time to be productively selfish. It is a time to, like, for example, some friends of my wife and I just bought a house in Florida. It's got a pool. He's a dentist. She was a nurse, and she's been a nurse forever. But her dad taught her young to save her money, and by the time she was in her 20s, had well over what she needed for like a house down payment in an IRA, and like she was really smart with it, and she's been with the same man since high school because she followed this mantra of I'm going to be productively single. I'm going to be I'm still going to have fun. I'm still going to hang out with my friends and all these things. But if you chase those things without any underlying foundation, then all you're going to be left with is not those things. And for me, like, when I met my wife, it was a very God situation. I saw her for the first time and was blown away and was like, who the heck is that? And then at the time, she was dating someone else. And so, but instead of preparing myself, I went off and dated other people and was just like waiting. And I didn't know I was waiting for her, but I also didn't take enough personal care to prepare myself. So like all of my challenges and all of my changing. Your new phone is ringing.
Hey, listen, shut that thing up.
But I didn't care about myself. I cared about experiences, and I cared about staying out all night, and I cared about, the things that will go away when you're married. And I cared too much about those things. Being single sucks unless you want to be. I mean, we've got a friend who doesn't want, like, he's been in a couple relationships. He wants to be single for the rest of his life. Because he just feels like that is what he's called to do and
At least this time, this period.
I don't think we're talking about the same person.
No, I was just saying in general.
But yeah,
Quick question: do you guys think being single is a calling or a vocation?
I-
Because like if you join if being single doesn't necessarily mean you don't get married. Like, but do you think being single, like I own my own house, I have a job, do you think that's a calling outside of a religious life? Because technically, they're single in a secular sense because
Yes.
they're not married, but they are married to the church
In Christ.
and Christ. So Christ is their bride. So do you think the state of being 20 years old, you don't have a girlfriend, do you think that's a calling, or is that a temporary state?
Personally, I think it can be, because ultimately my mind goes to if you are single, there's a plethora of people that you can actually devote your time to, who may need your time and your presence and your I don't know. I hesitate to say your persona, but ultimately the gift of yourself. I mean, that's where, like, personally, there's a bunch of people who are single and who are sad and single, to where it's
Right.
like, I don't have a problem with being, what?
louder.
I don't have a problem being single, honestly, because that means there are a bunch of people in my life, especially currently, who kind of need my presence. At least that's the way I feel like God is kind of revealing that to me, is there are people in, at least personally in my life, who need my presence, who need the gift of me, Dan. To whereas if God were to give me a relationship right now, I know for a fact that would take away from that, because I would want to spend time with them, and I'd choose to be, like, there are people, I mean, shoot, just in my family that I know for a fact kind of need my presence right now. And so me being single, I have more of an opportunity to, this is going to sound egotistical, but hey, I'm cool. They need the gift of me.
I like that.
And again, if I was in a relationship, I would not be able to, because I would easily choose to go spend time with the person that I'm in a relationship with. Or, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
and that's where, like, because I've got a coworker who's single, and he's, as far as I know, he's pretty private with kind of either his experiences in past relationships or he's mid-60s right now, and as far as I know, he's always been single. Now granted, that's just kind of the nature of being a server, though, is it's when you're a server and you're not management, it's hard to take time away from work, at least in country club industry. That's kind of the other part of me being single is I don't honestly have a time to actually develop a relationship outside of work, because my work is constantly calling me, and if work isn't calling me to be there, it's the bourbonist. And ultimately,
Don't blame us.
but it's things that I enjoy. I enjoy serving people. I enjoy, because ultimately I'm nurturing those relationships in work. So, like, whether it be a bourbonist relationship or whether it be a relationship at the country club, I enjoy nurturing those. And
because I don't think, and I can come back to this, 'cause I think I diverted from what Adam was talking about. I kind of interjected. But I don't think being single is a calling. It's a state that's meant to be traversed through. But, Adam, I think I kind of pulled away from what you were saying.
I don't know. I'll be honest. I'm trying to add to this conversation, but I am so neck deep in
children
and life and work and all of my growth. I will shoot you, bird.
Nice. Wait a minute. You love it. Pass the Dutchie, man.
I'm also dealing with a cigar that won't stay lit. A lot of my change happened after I got married, because I didn't prepare myself. I would just throw myself into relationships hoping that I figured it out. Mm-hmm. And I didn't figure it out while I wasn't in one. And so, there we go. I'm trying to add to the conversation, but I just, wow.
Well, and I think that's where, how big of it, here, I'm going to pull a you. How drastic of a change were you called to make when Jack and Kate were born?
I was 24. They were not planned. We weren't married. This is, for anybody who's new.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
God's biggest blessings never really are.
Yeah, they're really never planned. It grew me up quickly, but I also am learning through just life with my wife that there were a lot of things that I didn't cultivate. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of things, like, as a parent, I just didn't work on. I just would kind of go at something or a situation and just hope that I do my best. And, like I said, all of my entire fatherhood has been, hey, I hope this works. Right? Instead of, how can I attack this from it? Now I'm much more, I guess, fine-tuned, and the Lord is still working on that, because I think I know things, and I definitely don't. It's hard to speak to.
I get that.
I was twins the first go round, especially when you're not expecting them, is
Bing, bang, boom.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like it was nuts,
I bet.
and my reality shifted, and I thought I could continue, because then after the twins were born, about 6 months after, their mom and I split, and so I was single with 2 kids. And everyone under the sun, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but every woman thinks that they're going to be a good mom, or most of them do. And so, the women who were willing to date me, if you will, were strong and had a sense of self, at least they thought. And then it always came down to, a few months down the line into the relationship, the woman was like, ugh. But he has 2 kids.
Yeah.
And that was always heartbreaking.
Sure.
I mean, I dated a woman who I started to fall in love with her, and then she told me that she was still in love with her ex from 2 years before. And yeah. If the door's not open, it's not freaking open. Like, what?
That's okay.
You should have said yes.
Just walk in and find out.
Is it open? Yeah. Yeah, dude, go ahead. We got drinks.
Is it open? Yeah, to us, not to you. I don't know, man. I spent a lot of my single years just chasing moments and fun, rather than, because I didn't really have a sense of self. And I think that's the biggest thing that I learned from becoming a father so quickly was it's not about me anymore. And so I couldn't chase those moments. And I was stuck in this, I have no sense of self. I have no sense of what it is to be a father. Mm-hmm. And now I just have to figure it out.
Right.
And it's terrifying. And then when I did get married, we had 3 kids back to back, and back to back.
Talk about bing, bang, boom.
Yeah, exactly. It was it knocked me out.
There was a lot of bing, bang, boom.
It was,
Dan's on a roll.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Says the single man.
it was.
Well, and
I don't even remember, to be honest with you. Like I just, I guess my biggest piece of advice is you can't ever spend too much time trying to figure yourself out. You can't. It's never too much. I mean, as long as it doesn't get in the way of life, I don't think it's ever too much trying to let God mold you while you don't have any other people to be responsible for. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, like a good father, a father's role is to prepare his children for life. So when you're single, God should play a very active role in that. Your earthly father should play a very big role in that. And then at some point you get handed the keys to that car, and now it's your turn to drive.
right.
That's why I don't think being single is a vocation. There can be circumstances that make the reality of being married or joining a religious life not something that doesn't happen. Like I had an aunt who never got married, but it was because she always wanted to be a religious sister, and her parents didn't want her to be. They wanted her to get married. And so I think she was called to be a nun, and so her heart was set on that, and she just never met the right person, and so she ended up being single her whole life. And I think that's really sad. Now, I think she spent it well. She was very active, but I think God is as human, we are communal people. We're called for a community of some sort. So whether that's, as Catholics, whether that's the church or whether that's a spouse and a family, we're not meant to be single. I don't think. I think
There are seasons,
there are there are
but seasons don't last.
Seasons don't last. They come and go.
That's where, I'm sorry, keep going.
No, please.
I think this is great because this is one of the first times I think us three actually disagree, because I would actually disagree. Personally, in my own opinion, I would disagree. I think a very select few are called to be single, because, regardless of whether or not you're called to be married, a priest, or be part of the monastic life, like, your bride, regardless, first and foremost, is Christ himself. That's ultimately why God gives you a wife. As a man, God gives you a wife to be your partner, to ultimately help be your partner in your pursuit of Christ.
Right.
And same thing for her, right? God gives you to her, your wife, to be a partner in her pursuit for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Because regardless of what vocation you are called to, your responsibility is to lead others to Christ. While they, ultimately, they have the responsibility to lead you to Christ, whether they know it or not. And that's where, being single, regardless, if you end up getting married, if you end up becoming a priest, or go monastic life, or let's say none. Pun was not intended, but
Or none.
so
It's all these things or none.
so because guys, you can't be a nun. So I think there's a very select few that ultimately, I think God ultimately blesses them with a beautiful singleness, that because they are single, they are able to give their lives and the beauty of themselves to their community around them. A little bit different than, say, a priest, or I would say a monk who's more of the community, because there are also the people in the monastic life. They're very, very much secluded, and so that's where I've seen a lot of single people that are very much content and very much spiritually alive, that I feel like if God wanted them to be married, they would have found somebody, or God would have blessed them with somebody. Now, granted, they have their own choice. So that's where I kind of go back and forth, because maybe God did present them like the boat,
Right.
presented them numerous different people who could have been brides.
Right.
And maybe they chose no. Maybe the bride chose no. Maybe that woman ended up saying no to them. And because we all have our own choice. And we're ultimately, no matter who you are, God ultimately presents situations in which you have a choice. You can either say yes or no to.
Well, and that brings me to, go ahead.
Ultimately, to kind of wrap up, because I'm monologuing like a
He
mongoloid.
kept monologuing.
He's
Mongoloiding.
Jesus help me. But that's where I personally, in my own opinion, I would disagree, because I think there's a very select few people that I think ultimately they're called to serve their community, that if they were given a relationship with a wife, or on the other hand, with a husband, they would ultimately not be able to serve their community as much as God is calling them to.
Yeah.
Well, and St. Paul writes about that. He chose to be single for the rest of his life because he chose to pursue Christ.
Right.
And he writes very specifically, if you are to find a wife, then you are to find a good thing. That's in Psalms, right? Or Proverbs, I think. It's Proverbs that says a man who finds a wife finds a good thing. But
David or Solomon said it.
but Paul also says, but it will also take your time away from you. And so I think ultimately it's you're given free will. You don't use it as freely as culture says. Because I think
Or in
the
a selfish way that culture
right,
says.
because I think there's, like I was saying, there's productive selfishness and there's selfish selfishness. There is a way to use your free will and your free time that does not deplete who you are. But there's also this mindset of culture that says, do what you want, try it out, try it. It's hey, and I'll try anything. Like that's not wise.
That's
right?
also the way society's preaching about or teaching people to go about dating. It's just try them out. Just go date. Just go have fun.
Well,
And it's like,
right.
So you're dating without intention. You're dating without purpose. Which ultimately the dating is ultimately supposed to be more like a courtship. Like
Right.
you're supposed to court the other person. You're supposed to see, can I spend the rest of my life with this person?
Yeah.
But if you're just trying her out, like
Right. No, there's a flaw, at least in the wording and the mindset. I
apologize.
I think I agree with the premise of what you're saying, Adam. I don't think I agree with the term like productive selfishness. It's kind of like saying there's good sin and bad sin. I don't think selfishness is ever a good thing.
Okay.
there's a good beating.
Yeah, there's good lust and bad
Yeah.
lust. It's like no, like
That was
even
a good
man,
fist.
Even a husband shouldn't lust after his wife. Like lust is
mean that.
lust is lust. Laziness is laziness. Sloth is sloth. That's why I think.
So then maybe I'll change it: productive single versus passive single.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's why I agree with the premise, which is, and that I think that narrows it down better, hones in better. There's being productive when you're single, but laziness I don't think plays any part in our domestic or spiritual life. And I think everything is ordered towards that next step. So, I mean, I don't know if I can perfectly argue this, but unless I think there's a reason why you never found that right person, whether it was maybe your parents are divorced and so commitment is something
Scares you.
is scary, yeah. Or taking that next step, into the unknown is scary. Maybe you struggle with control, and so I don't know what that next step is going to entail because I'm used to controlling everything in my life. That next step is an unknown. It's with this other person who has their own needs and desires. But I really think there's only two vocations in life, and I don't think being single is one. I think if you remain single your entire life, something happened. You missed some boat in your life that maybe you just never took that chance again. Maybe you got hurt. I feel like it comes from a place of woundedness more than anything, or maybe a lack of maturity. Because, I mean, progress is ever pushing us forward. If you are really preparing yourself when you're single, there should be a next step in my mind, in my understanding of life. It should be preparing you for something. And if you just remain single, I'm not saying there isn't great good that you can do, but there's some of that I think can get elevated when you take that next step. If you're passionate about helping people and their growth, you can do that on that next level as a father and have that great blessing, honor, privilege, and responsibility of raising your kids. And if you could, if you go the religious route, guiding and someone's spiritual journey, like that to me is what all of this is building up for. It's almost like an athlete that just spends all his time in the gym but never plays the game. At some point you have to commit yourself or align that effort towards a goal at some point.
Well, and that's where I would play devil's advocate and say, what about the people who end up getting married but never have kids? And that's because ultimately, like, a key foundational part of a marriage is that it's fruitful.
Oh, yeah.
And that you're open to
To
bearing
life.
fruit. Exactly.
Right.
And so,
If God doesn't bless you with children, that's one thing. But you should always be preparing yourself for that reality. And so I mean, there could be a single state when you're married that until God blesses us with children, we're going to be very active in our community, very active in our church. But then when you have kids, you do have to pull back a little bit, because now you have your own church to take care of. As a father, you are the priest of your family, the spiritual head of that family.
right.
Until you have kids, I think it would be properly ordered to direct your time and attention and effort towards the church at large. But I really disagree that being single is a calling. I'm open to being convinced otherwise, but I just don't see that as something that God would call someone to. Like, no, I don't. I just don't quite see the proof of that. But regardless, I mean, we could probably debate that further. Regardless, being stagnant, there's no such thing as stagnation. You're either moving forward or you're moving backwards.
Correct.
So whether or not you ever find the right person, we could almost table that, for another discussion. Have someone else on the podcast to weigh in on that. But regardless, progress, advancement, betterment. That is what we're all called to do, regardless of the state.
Absolutely. And that's where, from my standpoint, I just, for me, thinking that singleness can be called as a vocation, or like singleness could be a calling from God, is that I'm not the person to necessarily label an individual person's version of progress.
Sure. Yeah.
Because, I mean, shoot, God knows us better than we know ourselves. And that's where my personal belief is that our life's mission is ultimately not only coming to know Christ and who He is, but also allowing Christ to reveal more of ourselves to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if God understands what would ultimately bring us down, or if God understands what would halt our progress, and let's say maybe a relationship would ultimately halt our progress in coming to know ourselves and coming to know Christ, that's where I feel like God ultimately, because I do think that there are certain people that God keeps from having relationships, at least successful ones. Because ultimately that person may not be the best suited for them. And so I think there are people that ultimately God calls to be single, because being single, they do a lot more for the community than not. That's where I would say, ultimately, I think the best judge is, are you truly joyful in being single as an individual? And that comes to the individual himself or herself to ultimately say, are you content? Not only content, but are you joyful in what you do? Are you joyful in where you're at? Because if you're not, then ultimately I'd say there is more for you. But if you are single in where you're at personally, and where you're at right now, are you filled with joy? Are you content? Are you
I just don't see a 6-year-old person or someone nearing the end of their life really honestly being truly happy that they never got married, or truly happy that they never found a vocation. I think remaining single, I see it more as a temptation to not take a next step.
Now, my question, and this is again to play devil's advocate. I hesitate to say what I'm about to say, but ultimately, would you think that because you were called to marriage, because you are married and you have your second child on the way, would you ultimately think that that's from it's from a certain standpoint? It's from a person who was called to marriage? It's kind of like I've heard numerous priests say, I don't understand how you people who have, what I mean by you people is the people who have been called to marriage, how they do it. So ultimately, let's say I'm a priest and I'm talking to you. Ultimately, the priest said, I don't understand how you married people are married. It doesn't make sense to me. How you guys are able to let go of yourselves as much as God is calling you to.
I've never heard a priest say that.
But they were like,
I get
it's
what you're saying.
very admirable how you guys are able, because I mean, granted,
married man
priests
might-
are called to give themselves in the same way, but in a different viewpoint, in a different, I guess you would say, position,
Yeah.
because they're called to do the same thing, just for more people.
I mean, a married man could say the same thing about a priest too. Could.
Exactly.
You know, it's,
And so that's where, I think a married man won't, and I'm not saying I'm called to be single, but just being in the state that I'm in, that's where I could easily see.
I think it's, well, and I think me sitting in the middle of you two is perfect because I agree with both sides, but I think yours is more seasonal and yours is more, your season now is marriage, your season now is single, my season now is married with kids, and so I could speak, I am having a hard time speaking to the single life because I haven't been there for a while, right? But I think, and we are unfortunately coming up on time, but I think this leads perfectly into our next discussion, which is being the spiritual head. And like, okay, how do you do that as a single person and how do you do that as a married person? And what does life hold for both sides?
right.
And where is God taking both sides? And I hate to end it so quickly, but yeah, we are.
No, we do need
We're
to
out.
before they open. And also, what is it? ABV down in Arnold. Or
Yes,
down in-
ABV down in Arnold, Missouri has investment whiskey.
Go invest in some whiskey.
It's fantastic.
Because also it's Demetrius's stuff, finished in specific
Yep.
barrels for each of the. I'm telling you right now. So Demetrius is a wizard, but a whiskey wizard.
Yep.
The best
And when
kind.
you take that, especially
And then age it a little bit in some
generation,
sort.
yeah.
And age it in some sort of barrel, and their next one they're coming out with is stellar. I'm not going to ruin it, but we're excited.
Do it.
But live from Billy G's, or recorded at Billy G's, we've got
Joseph?
Adam.
Shiny head himself,
And
Dan the man.
Cue ball.
Thanks for joining us at the table.
I'm not that white. I've got a tan. I went and got spray tan last week.
We'll see you next time.
Only on my body.
What a weird note. Only on my body.